Okay, thanks for joining this React Native workshop. So I hope you all have a good break over the past 2 weeks. Okay, so before I begin, right, I'll just do a quick introduction. Oh, okay. Um, can I check if you all can see my screen? So thumbs up if okay, nice. So a bit about myself. I'm Justin, year 3 NUSCS going into year 4. I'm part of NUS Hackers, and this workshop is by NUS Hackers. And actually, I used React Native for my Orbiter 2 years ago. Um, and this is something that was very interesting because this is back when AI was still cool and stuff. So we created like an AI journaling app in React Native where at the end of everything, at the end of every month, it's like a sort of like a Spotify rap where they will generate AI art and summaries based on um your entries, and you can use the coins to buy interesting stuff. Okay, so that's it for wait, what's this? Yeah, so that's my project 2 years ago. And other than that, I've also worked on creating apps for a few startups using React Native. So before we begin, React Native is like a two-part workshop. And for the first part, we'll focus more on the fundamentals. So things like React Native, JSX, introduction to the components, how do you deal with UI, how do you design the different UIs, how do you manage states. And at the end of it, you'll build like a small app. And then the second part will deal more details into like, dealing with external APIs, libraries, that kind of stuff. So a bit of like expectations, right? So this workshop isn't going to teach you about the processes. So things like how do you install the different stuff, that kind of stuff, right? I'm pretty sure that you can Google or ChatGPT, that kind of stuff. So what this workshop will focus on are like concepts, So the idea is that we want to give you an intuition on how React Native works so that when you start building your app, you can sort of know which direction to go. And this workshop will assume that you're a beginner. And if you have a bit of experience with React, some of the concepts that is going to be taught at the first half is going to be more or less intuitive. But I'm going to go through some of them, and I'm going to assume that you're sort of like new to this whole web development thing. And there will also be jargons that I'm going to use, but as I say, right, these are not the focus of the workshop because at the end of the day, I'm going to focus more on the concepts, and all the other processors and all this jargon, you can easily Google them. And think of it this way, right? It's like by the end of the workshop, you want to have like a good intuition of how this whole ecosystem of React Native works, so that when you start building, you know what to Google and like which direction to proceed. And the way I'm going to go about doing this workshop is that I'm going to focus more on like the demo, like the hands-on side, instead of like more on the theory side of things. And at the end of it, we are going to try to build something like the interface for this NUS Bus app. Because I think that is something that all of us are familiar with. It's probably different from all the YouTube tutorials that you're going to watch. And I will consider this workshop a success if, let's say, at the end of the workshop, you can look at a design and know how to at least like be able to design the interface at a very high level. Yeah. And okay, so go on to more details as to why React Native, right? So I think most of you here are probably going to use React Native for your Orbiter, and you probably have done a bit of research on React Native. So one thing that you'll notice is that React Native is cross-platform, which means that you can, if you code in React Native, right, the app that you coded can be used on both Android and iOS. So it's different from Swift, right? Because if you use Swift, it's if native to iOS, whereas like, if you use Kotlin and I don't know, like some other stuff, it might be Android specific. So um yeah, and other than that, right, another advantage of React Native is that the syntax is very similar to React. So for some of you who have experience with React, um, or I'm assuming that most of you are going to be touching on React sooner or later, right? So this is like the skills that you learn in React Native is going to be transferable to the skills, in React and vice versa. And I mean, since React is like the most popular framework now, I think there is some advantage in learning how to use React and React Native. And okay, so this is like the process part that I'm alluding to just now that I'm not going to focus on. So first up, we want to set up Expo. So Expo is like a abstraction on top of React Native, which makes your life easier because it abstracts away a lot of the nitty-gritty details of dealing with React Native. So if you use Expo, you can basically focus on building an app instead of like spending time on configuration and that kind of stuff. And I think there are, official documentations that you can read to get started. So for example, you can, use this command to create an app. So let's say you have a repo ready, right? You can enter this command, and from there on, you can, put the app of your name, let's say my Orbital app, and so on and so forth. So for me, I'm actually not going to do this because I have another project installed. And for the rest of the demo, I'm going to be using this, but this is basically like a blank slate that I'm going to be using. Okay, so if you're using Mac, everything is quite straightforward because you have like an inbuilt emulator. But if you're using Windows, it might be a bit complicated because you might have to install Android Studio. And same thing, I'm not going to focus on the processors because you can Google this thing. But once you have Android emulator set up, you can go ahead and create your Expo Go project and start it. So let's say you have the project ready and you open in your code editor. This is something that you get here. So you can run the app by using this command, npx expo start. And now you can see a QR code that appeared on your terminal. So what this does is that you can download the Expo Go app on your phone, and then you can use the app to scan the QR code, and whatever that you code is going to be rendered on your phone. So alternatively, if you're using Mac, you can just press I to open your iOS simulator. And if you have Android Studio downloaded on your MacBook, you can also press A to open Android Studio. Yeah, so you can see the project being loaded, and everything here is going to be rendered on your phone or like your simulator on your laptop. Okay, so before we go into the details, just like a quick introduction of what this thing is. So I mean, for now you don't have to focus on the details because I've installed Tailwind for this, but for now you just ignore that part. So what you see here are JSX, and you can think of it as like building blocks for your apps. So the JSX are components that are like Lego blocks that you build on top of one another, and each of it have like different functionalities, and they're quite self-explanatory. So for instance, the text here just renders a text. And when you're working with React Native, there are generally three major components that you want to focus on. So one is the JSX, which basically the building blocks for your whole application. So things like your text box, that kind of stuff, your buttons, your input field, that kind of stuff. The second part is the JavaScript, which handles the data and the logic side of things. When you want to fetch data from somewhere else, or you want to manipulate data, you want to handle data. So that'll be done in JavaScript mainly. Or if you want, you can also use TypeScript. And the third aspect is CSS, which is what you see over here. So this is basically just like styling. It changes the aesthetic of your application. So if you have like a very basic text, you can, change the size of the text or like change the color of the text, that kind of stuff. So once you have the building blocks, which is the JSX, that determines the buttons, the interfaces, the different types of components, you have the JavaScript, which handles the logic, the data, and you have the CSS, which handles the aesthetic, the view, that kind of stuff. You're able to create like a very impressive app. So for JSX, it's actually quite straightforward. So you have every time you create like in this case, view, for those of you who are familiar with React, it would be something similar to like a div. Every time you create like a view, you have to close it, right? Because you can think of it as like a box. So and everything within the box is what you call like the children of like the parent component. And from here you can, like you can, if I just copy and paste this, and you see that okay, now there are two components, two children components. And now you can add in a bit of JavaScript. So for JavaScript, I can say something like, okay, const name equals to Justin. And now I've this JavaScript code. If I want to embed the JavaScript into the JSX element, I have to use curly brackets. So something like this, right? So once I refresh it, I get hello Justin. So now we have two components that we are using. So one is the JSX and the other one is the JavaScript. So this can also, I can also do like, numbers and yeah. And you see that the numbers is being rendered here as well. Okay. And now that you have the JavaScript, you can also create like functions. So before that, right, there are other sort of like components that you might find useful. So one of it is, let's say, button. So a button is quite straightforward. It is, you press it, you show that, oops, that the button is being pressed. Sorry, let me just create like a function. So now you can create your own custom function, right? If you, let's say you have a button and you want to have some sort of side effect when the button is being pressed, you can do something like console log button press. And I'll change this to this. So the button takes in a title, which is what is being rendered onto the screen, and it takes in another function. So what happens when you click the button? So in this case, once I click the button, it's going to log button press. And another thing that is, yeah, so button press, and yeah. So what you notice here is that even though, button doesn't really need like a open and close, right? Because we are just passing in the information directly. But this is basically equivalent as if I do button. So whatever that is open has to be closed. Sorry. Something like this. Yeah, it's like functionally equivalent. But as a short form, if there's nothing within the parent, I can just short form it and then just like remove the closing tag. Okay. So now we have something like this, right? You can also sort of like think of it, because we can imagine like the components as like boxes. You can also abstract away some of the stuff into their own functions, right? If let's say the thing is getting a bit large, let's say I have multiple tags here. Hello, name, right? So if my component is getting a bit large, I can try to abstract some information away into their own component. So I can do something like text component, hello world, and name, which is basically the same thing. And then I can remove this and put text component. But one thing you realize is that in this case, since I define my name within my app function, my text component doesn't contain the information about my name. So somehow I have to be able to pass this information that is defined within my parent component into my child component. So it's actually quite straightforward. In this case, the child component has to be able to accept an argument, which is the name, and then the parent can pass in the argument to the child. So once this is done, and I refresh it, you see that on the screen, it is still the same thing. Nothing has changed. So what I'm basically doing is that I'm abstracting away the details into their own component. So I can take this a step further and I can, like be able to um, create, let's say, another file called, let's say, text component, not tsx. And then I'm going to copy this and I can paste it here and export it. And then from here, I import the text component. And it's still the same thing. Okay, so that is like the very basic on how each of the different components can be moved around and how each of them can work as like an individual. You can think of it as like a box. So okay, so now I'll just go through some of the common components that you're going to be interacting with when you are using React Native. So we have gone through text, we have gone through button. So you can also have image. An image is going to take in an argument which is the path to the image. So in this case, I have like some default images that under the assets folder. This is what is generated when I first created the React Native application. So let's say I have this image under assets and I want to render it onto the screen. So looking at the path, I can just go to assets and faith, oops, faith icon. And now I'm rendering the image onto the screen. Okay, so touchable opacity is basically like a button where but instead of like being able to press on words, now you can wrap items within the touchable opacity and you can press on the whole component. So as an example, let's say if I want to be able to press on the image, so I can wrap the image around a touchable opacity and um sorry, opacity, and okay, let's just remove this for now. So something like this, and now I'm able to press on the image. So just like a button, a touchable opacity can take in a function as an input, which determines the side effect when the item, whatever is within the touchable opacity, is being pressed. So for instance, I can define a function, image press. And now when I press the image, you can see that, okay, and then on press, and now when I press the image, you can see that this is being logged onto the terminal. And what is good about touchable opacity, unlike a button, is that you can have you can sort of like put multiple components within the touchable opacity, and it can add like one whole unit, right? So if I press on this whole thing, you can see that the whole component is treated as a button. Yeah. So before we move into the other more advanced like components, I'll make a bit of introduction to how exactly do you organize components together. So if you notice here, you see that the things the components are being rendered sort of like sequentially vertically downwards, right? So what if you want to render it differently? So if you look at the drawing board, right? Okay, so I'm going to use a bit of my iPad and draw stuff, but the latency is a bit bad, so just bear with it. Let's say you have a view, so you can think of it a view as like a box. And within a view, you want to organize different components within the view. So by default, everything is going to come one after another, something like this, right? So let's say if you want to be able to render things in rows. So you can do this using this thing called flex, right? So what you're doing is that you are creating, you are trying to organize your components in a specific manner. And this will come very handy when we are trying to create the next bus app later on. And a lot of the things that you are, a lot of sort of like interfaces can be created with with like the with very simple CSS rules. And just by knowing about Flex and like how do you organize components together, you can probably achieve like 80% of what you want to do for any interface. So when we go back to this, right? Let's say if I, instead of organizing everything vertically, I want to be able to, organize everything horizontally in rows. So what I can first do is that I can wrap the whole thing is in a box, which is the whole view. And I copy this whole thing here, right? So now everything here is wrapped within a box. And I can know that it's a box because like if I do, let's say background black, right? This is the box that is containing all the items within the parent. So yeah, this is a box. And if I do flex row, okay, so again, right, you don't have to know about the syntax that I'm using here. This is equivalent to like CSS. I'm using Tailwind, but you can do the same for like normal CSS. It's going to be the same thing. For the purpose of this workshop, I'm going to be using Tailwind because it's way faster for me and I don't have a lot of time for this workshop. So but this is basically the same as like what you would encounter in normal CSS. It's just the syntax is just a bit different. So now if I do fetch row and then I remove the background, now you can see that everything is being organized in rows. So if I, for visualization purpose, right, let's say I set the background as black, and let's say I want to make the box take up the whole width of the screen. I can do something like with full. Yeah. And then okay, let's go back to this. Okay. So this is the direction in which you want to organize your components. So you can either organize it horizontally or you can organize it vertically. And within your, let's say you within your component, right, you can also choose to, like how you want to distribute the space for each of the children component. So in this case, by default, it is putting every item at the center because of this center property, right? So let's say if I remove this, you see that everything starts from the top. So the space are given, like sequentially from the top. But if you want to even out everything nicely, like starting from the center, you have to, justify towards the center. And if you want to space everything equally, but taking up all the space of the parent, you have to do between. Mm, yeah. Now everything is being taken up. It's basically the children component is now taking up the whole space of the parent. So that's that. Okay, so before we move on into other details, I think I'll also go through a bit of the other CSS like concepts very roughly, but this is not technically under the scope of React Native. So let's say if I have like different subcomponents, like let's say subcomponent um 1, which is width And then I have, let's say, subcomponent 2. Oh, this here. And then let's say if I have, I put the subcomponents within the parent component. Mm, wait, what? Okay, let's say I have two different components within the parent component. So same thing, right? I can either organize it vertically, or I can organize it horizontally like this. So if I want to have a bit of gap between the components, I can, add margins to it. So things like, let's say from the component one, if I want a bit of gap between component 1 and 2, I can add like margin to the right 2, and that will create like a small gap. Likewise, I can add like margin left 2, and that will create, a gap to the left of component 2. So, and I can also change, the width of the height of the items with CSS. And I can also change, instead of like having like absolute values, I can also use like ratios. So things like half of the screen, and this will also be half of the screen. Yeah. So if I want a bit of border, if I want a bit of gap with the border, I can also put like, margin. Instead of margin to the right, I can do like a very general margin. Okay, never mind, it's not working. Okay, anyways, so the idea is that by using CSS, you are able to sort of like manipulate the aesthetic of your components. And these are concepts that we are going to be using when we are building the next bus apps later on. So back to the different components, right? Now we have gone through the view, the text, the image, the buttons, and touchable opacity. There are a few others components that you are going to be encountering very often, which is the input and the input. So text input. So before we go into the input, right, we need to be able to understand state and how states are being managed when dealing with React Native or any React application. So let's say we have a number, right? Let's say number equals to 0. And then you have a function that increments the number by 1, right? And then you have, let's say, a button that when you press the button is going to increment the number. So if we use our knowledge from CS 1101S or like 2030 or whatever, right? I think the intuitive thing that we want to do is that, okay, like something like this, right? Every time you press the button, you want to be able to increment the button. But the thing is like when you start using when you actually try it out in React Native, right, it's not going to work. Because like when you press the button, you see that the number 1, the number 0 is not increased, right? And if you console log the thing, you see that even though the number is increased, the actual number is being increased, but when you press it, the increase is not being rendered onto the screen. And this is because like React Native doesn't know that the number is being has already been increased. So the React Native doesn't know when to re-render the whole app to reflect the new number, right? So in order for React Native to know that the number has already changed and to know to re-render the thing, you have to use like this thing called state. So oops, import use state from React. And what this does is that every time you changes the items that is defined with use state, it tells React Native that okay, the number has changed. It is time for you to re-render the whole application. So um, so this is just syntax, right? It's just like like it takes in the variable and the sort of like what changes, like what sets the variables and the default value of the variable. In this case, our default value is 0. So every time you press increment, we want to like increase the number of like that is being set. So which means that every time this function is being called, you are telling React Native that okay, the number has changed, time to re-render the whole thing. And now when you look at when you try again, now it works. So this is how React applications or like React Native in general handles like states, because like they need to know when to re-render the application when certain variables has changed. So that is use state. So we want to be able to use this concept to like do our input, right? So likewise, if you have, let's say, an input like a text input, right? Enter your name. So you can have okay, let's just remove that one. Okay, so now you have a text input which you hopefully you want to be able to type something, and the text that the string that you type, right, is not going to be captured anywhere, right? Because like yeah, you need some sort of ways that to keep track of what is being typed into the text input. And React Native also needs to be able to like handle the when the text input field changes, right? So in that case, right, you have to use for instance, right, like text set text, and you want to be able to like um you want to be able to like track the text every time it changes. So let's say we can create like a new function, right? So on change text, and then we console log the text. Now every time you type something, it should be captured by React Native. Then you can just you can then find ways to handle this input that's being built in. So for instance, you can use like a button that submit. Let's say you can create a function called submit, which just like do something with the text. So your text is being sent to the database. Of course, like right now we are not really connected to the database, but you can imagine like having a way that you can handle the text that's being captured. So yeah, something like this, right? So now that you have typed everything, you can press submit, and then hopefully now we'll be able to handle the text one form or another. So that is the text input. So now we have gone through view. So view is sort of like a box that encapsulates components, and you can sort of like be able to like refactor or like extract abstract away details by using view, by treating them as like a boxes. And they are also used to organize components, whether or not you want to render them in rows or whether or not you want to render them in columns, and whether or not you want to space them out or whether or not you want to just squeeze everything into the center. So in a sense, like the view is sort of like a box to make you be able to handle the organization of components. And then you have text, which is self-explanatory, buttons and touchable opacity. And then you have text input and you have image. So yeah, and then we have also gone through like props. So if you have a child component and you have a parent component and you want to be able to pass information from parent component into the child component, you have to use props, which is just this thing, right, where you take in an argument, and the parent will be passing this argument to the child. Okay. And now that we have gone through the basics, I think we have a very rough toolkit that we can use to try to build the app. So before we start building the app, like the first thing that you want to do is that you want to be able to, like design from a very high level how you want to organize components within the app. So to do that, I'll open this thing up. Oh, shit. So this is the screenshot for the NUS bus app. And we want to be able to, design this by the end of this session. So when you look at the NUS bus app, you can think of this whole screen as like a view, right? Then within the view, the first thing that I noticed is that everything is being organized, like at a very high level, right? Everything is being organized um vertically downwards, right? Because this is the different components. So at the very top level, they have this bus stop thing. And then below the bus stop, you have like the search bar and all those like things. Let's just call it like filter components, because they're all like components for you to, filter stuff. And then below it, you have sort of a list of um bus stops and their information. And at the very last level, you have the navigation bar. So if you treat view as a box, right, you can see that the box is made out of like one, two, three, like four major components, right? The header, this thing, and the navigation bar. So for now, right, let's just like black box away the details within each of the individual components, right? Right now, we only care about the high level, right? So we want to be able to like code out like the high level. Okay, so I'm just going to remove all these things for now. Um, let's say return view. Okay, for now, just have a text that says hello world. Yeah. Um, okay. So if you go back to the drawing board, we see that everything is being organized vertically, which means that if you go back to the guide, we want to be using a flex column because we want to be able to organize components like vertically. So I'm going to add like flex column. And then within the parent component, you have 5 subcomponents, right? One is let's call it the header. Okay, for now I'm using placeholder, and then the second one is the filter component. And then the third one is the list of bus stops. And then the next one is the navigation bar. Something like this, right? Okay, for now, we just treat them as black box. So as you can see, right now, everything is being organized vertically. If I change this to flex row, now they'll be organized in rows. So based on the design, I want it to be organized vertically. So if you take a look back at the design, right, everything is being spread evenly, not evenly, everything they're taking up the whole space of the screen, right? Because they are they're taking up the whole space of the parent instead of like being squeezed to the center. And right now they are being squeezed to the center. So instead, we want it to be, instead of justify center, we want it to be justified between, so that they all take up the whole space of the parent. And next thing that we want to do is that you know we want to go through each of the individual children component and start working on them, right? So let's say we start with the header, right? which is quite simple. The header is just like a blue background with a text. Okay, for now I'm just going to hard code everything. Okay, I see that the header is being um covered by the the what do you call this, the whatever bar. So for now, this is not a good practice, but for now, for the purpose of this workshop, I'm going to just add a margin to the header so that it goes, it adds like gaps from the top. Okay, sorry. Yeah, it adds like a bit of gap between the top of the header component and the header component. So I mean, I'm going to we're going to be working iteratively on this, but for now we accept this hard code. So now I also want to set the background to blue, let's say 400, and I want it to take out the width of the whole thing. And if I look at the design, it's actually a darker shade of blue, something like this, and the text is white, and the bus stop is actually bolded. So bold, and this is bus stop. Okay, so bus stops, right? So of course, there are some other modifications I can do. For instance, I realized that the bus stop is actually larger. I can increase the size of the title. And if you look at this design, right, you realize that there is a gap between the text and whatever component is holding this thing, right? So in that case, we want to add a bit of gap between the bus stop and um, the end of the component. So I can use, padding to add the gap, which is different from margin, because if you use margin, you are going to increase the gap between this whole text component and the parent component. But we don't want that. We want to add the gap between the component and whatever is within this text component. So um, put padding. Again, like this concept might seem unfamiliar, but you can learn more about CSS on your own. But this is basically the basic idea of how it works. So likewise, I see that there's a gap between the bus stop and the bottom and the top. So instead of adding padding to the left, I also want to be able to add padding to the top and bottom, which is the y-axis. Yeah. Okay, and the text is actually a bit too big. Something like that. Right. So now that I have the header component, again, right, I can use what I learned just now and refactor this into something that is a bit more modular. I can call this like header, and then basically the same thing, and then I just replace this whole thing with header, and it's going to be the same thing. So now that I'm done with the header, I can move on to the second component, which is um the filter function, right? So again, I can do the same thing and abstract this whole thing away into a filter, and then I can create a filter component for that. So let's go back to the drawing board. So previously we treated this filter component as like a black box, but now we can take a look at what the filter component is made out of. So again, right, we notice that in these filter components, there are actually three major components, right? Okay, first thing that we notice is that everything is being organized in rows. Basically, everything is being organized horizontally in this direction, right? So which means that we have to use flex row. And within this filter component, we have the search whatever input, and then we have an icon for the filter, and then we also have like an icon for the map or something. again, right, this thing, the search is actually made up of multiple components, but for now we treat the search as a black box because we go from high level to low level. So this whole search we just treat it as a black box. And then we have the we have the icon for the filter and the map. So before I move on, I'll just like take a quick screenshot of this so that I can use the image. So save it and then open this, and then I am going to um retrieve the image into my assets, and let's call this filter button. And then same thing, I am going to do this. Okay, save it. Map button. Save it. Search button. And yeah, that should be it. Okay, so let's go back to the filter. So we notice that, yeah, the filter button is organizing everything in rows. And there are three major components: the search, the filter button, and the map button. So we can add like a placeholder for now, right? So everything is being wrapped around you know, let's say a view. View, and then within the view we have the search, we have the filter button, and the map button. Okay, so likewise, by default, everything is being organized in column, but we want it to be organized in rows. So we add a row, and we want everything to be spread out, right? We don't want everything to be squeezed to the center. So in this case, we make sure that the parent component occupy the full width, and then we do this, right? So okay, and okay. So for now, we also notice that the search actually takes up um let's say 60-70% of the parent component, and the rest of the buttons take up maybe 10% of the parent component, right? Which means that instead of allocating the same amount of space for each component, we want the width to have more um like more space, right? So it can be 4 out of 5, let's say 80%. And then the rest we can just, let's say we just remove them by default. By default, they are going to occupy the remaining space of whatever is available. So now we have like a basic outline now, right? And then we can start to, modify whatever component there are. So one thing that we notice is that this is an image, right? So we can import, okay, we imported an image. Okay, we can import an image. Then we can replace this with um oops, with an image and the filter button. And I don't actually need that. Yeah, filter button. Okay, something like this. So same thing, I can use the image and replace the map button with this, right? Okay, let's just remove the background for now. Okay, so now I have something like this. But if you go to the actual NUS bus app, right, you'll notice that this thing is actually a button, it's not an image. So like what we learned just now, we can convert the image into a button by wrapping them around a touchable opacity. So we can import touchable opacity, and we do the same thing here, right? Where we wrap the button in touchable opacity and just, okay. So this is now clickable, right? And we want to define a function that is called when um this thing is being pressed. So likewise, I can move here and then, define a function, and this when I press the filter icon, this function is being called. Likewise, I can also define another function for the map button and wrap the map button around touchable opacity. And when I press the map button, this function should also be called. So, okay. So now another thing that we notice is that there is also a gap between, the end of like the items and um the borders, right? Whereas like in our app, there's no gap. So like what we did just now, we can add a margin to the whole, we can add a padding to the whole component so that whatever is within the component is padded with. So we add a padding to the x-axis too. So now there is a gap between, the padding and between the component and whatever is within the component. Okay, now we can move on to the search component. So if you look at the search, we can go back to the drawing board, right? Because we notice that the search is actually made out of two different components, right? So one is the input, and then we have the magnifying glass, whatever, the search button. So this is the text input, and then there is a button for you to click or whatever. I'm not sure whether the actual NUS bus apps allows you to click, but let's just assume it does. So likewise, we go back to the search. Let's replace this with a box, which is the view. And then within the search, it is made up of two items, right? One is the text input, and the other one is an image, which is let's just say require search button.png. Okay. And same thing, right? We notice that by default, everything is being organized vertically. So now we want to organize everything horizontally. So we can do the same thing and go to the parent component and use flex row search button. Okay, yeah. So now we have a text input, and then we have a button for us to press. So likewise, I can wrap this image in a touchable opacity so that I can, press the button. Gosh, I can press the button, and then I can create a function search press, which is called every time I press the search button. So like what we talked about just now, for the text input, we need some way to capture the string that is being passed into the text input. So we are going to be using state. So we use state from React, and again, we are going to add a search text and this thing, and then every time the text is being changed, we are going to it's going to be reflected into, it's going to be set within this variable, and we can confirm that by just logging out you can confirm that by logging out the thing and change this to on text change. So now when I type com3, yeah, this thing is being recorded. So when let's say I'm finished typing and I search thing, then I press the search button, you can find some way you can handle, the search function. And for now, we won't be going into the details on how you do that. Okay, so now we have this, right? You also notice that there's a border around this thing. Stop of building. Sorry, let me just change this. Stop of building. Okay, yeah. So we notice that there is a border around the text input, which means that we can just like change the aesthetic of the um rounded XL border. Okay, yeah, something like this. And if you can, it's actually rounder, so we can change it to make it more rounded, or even like make it completely round. So okay, that looks about the same. Okay, but now the search button is being um let's just put this with 3/4, so they take up less space than what is required. Yeah. Okay. The magnifying glass is supposed to be within the text window, but let's not care about that for now. Um. Okay. So for the next thing, right? What we notice also is that this filter component is supposed to come right after the header, and the list of bus stops is supposed to take up most of the space. So we can go back here and then make it such that, sorry, instead of text, okay, so this is supposed to, okay, so let's just abstract that away first. So bus stop list, okay, like that, and then I'm going to change this. Okay, so this bus stop list is supposed to take up more space than um the rest of the items. So we will want to make it take up to occupy as much space as possible. So we use, flex one. But again, the details of CSS and the syntax or whatever you can learn on your own. But for now, we just know that we want to make this thing take up the whole space. And you can check by, setting the background. And you notice that, yeah, when we set the flex to 1, now it takes up as much space as it possibly can. And if I remove this, it only takes the space is being allocated evenly to all the children component. So okay, let's go with this. And then now let's just add a bit of margin to the top, actually to the y-axis. Yeah. So for the bus stop, the list of bus stops, again, I think is a bit more complicated. So we need to go back to the drawing board. So this is a black box, right? Like we treat it as a black box. So this is what we call the bus stop list. And we can imagine that the bus stop list is made up of a bunch of bus stop components, right? So each of these like mini components are being rendered as like a list. So let's call this like bus stop component. And these are just like a bunch of them, right? And likewise, we can use the same concept, right? if you treat the bus stop list as a box, we notice that whatever that's within the parent, which is the bus stop list, they are being arranged vertically, and they are taking up, the whole space. So likewise, let's say that we have a list, right? And we have a bunch of um bus stops, one, two, and up to whatever, right? So for now, we just put placeholders for now. So we want to first, yeah, organize them vertically, which by default, we are not. Okay, maybe, sorry, flex. But now that we added like column, yeah, it's being organized vertically. And another thing that we want to do is that we want to spread them out to take up the whole space of the parent. So so when we look at the red color background, right, this is the parent of the bus stop list. This is the space that is allocated to the bus stop list. But the children components, bus stop 1 to 8, they are taking up just the center space, right? Which is basically what is happening here. So we have all the space here, but the children are taking up the center space. So we want to spread it out evenly while taking up the whole space. Same thing, we change, instead of center, we changed it to align them between this, justify between sex. Hmm. So let's see if I add okay, we'll come back to this later. I'll try to figure out. Okay, but for now, we have the bus stop components, and now we can think of it as like an abstraction, right? Now we can go into the now we can go into designing our own different bus stop components. So for now, let's just say bus stop component. So um again, each of these is um going to, like have like a few information that we want. So one is um the favorite icon, and then you have the bus stop name and the refresh button. So before we do that, I'm going to just like create some dummy values for the bus stops. But you can imagine that in an actual app, you are just going to you are going to fetch the information from some external API or whatnot. So let me just copy this. Okay, let's say I have, oh, okay. So let's say I have all this like bus stop timing information that is being that is being fetched from some external API, right? For now I'm hard coding them. So I want to be able to, pass this information into each of these like children component should have that information, right? For the different bus stops. So if you take a look at this, right? Okay, so there's a bus stop name, there's like the buses with the different arriving timing. And we want to map each of these to one single bus stop component. So what we can do is that we can go to the parent, which is the list here. And instead of hard coding it, we can use JavaScript to map the timing into the bus stop component. So in this case, right, you notice that the child component requires the parent component to pass in some form of information to the child component, right? Because for me to render the bus stop name, I need to know the name of the bus stop. And for me to get the name of the bus stop, I need to accept it from the parent. And let me just create a type. Sorry, I'm using TypeScript. Yeah. So I need to accept the argument from the parent, and I need to get the information from the parent to be able to render the information. So now I have something like this, right? Basically, a very simple bus stop component. I just have the name, and I want to be able to, like render this other information. So let's go back to the drawing board. Right? If we zoom in into, like, let's say one of these bus stop component, likewise, we notice that it is actually made up of smaller components. For one, on the left hand side, you have um, the star. And then on the right hand side, you have the refresh button. And then in the middle point, you have um, the bus stop name and other information like distance and whatnot. But for now, we just treat it as a black box. So same thing, we notice that everything is being organized horizontally as a row. And everything is being pushed to occupy the whole space of the component. So we can go back to our drawing board and then do the same thing. So we can create placeholders. Let's say on top of the name, we have the icon for the favorite. And then below the name, we have the refresh button, right? So something like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing and copy this. I mean, or did I do that just now? Okay, no. I'm going to copy this, save it, and then refresh button dot png. So this would be an image or a touchable opacity, an image that is pressable. Refresh. No. This is refresh button. Okay. So I have a refresh button that is pressable. And when it is being pressed, I say refresh press for bus stop. Okay, so let's say if I press the and then I add this function to the touchable opacity. So every time I press a single button, you can see that this function is being called for that specific component. So if I press the refresh button for bits2, it shows that the refresh button is being pressed for bits2, so on and so forth. Okay, so now I have the refresh button. I have to have the favorite button. So I mean, for the sake of this workshop, I'm not going. I'm just going to treat it as like a circle instead of a star. So the view will be leaf and white cloth. And then yeah, and then a closing tag. And then the color is going to be 400. Okay. Okay, for now, this is what we can work with. So just like the next bus, right? When we press it, we have to somehow keep track of the state of the button, right? When it's being pressed, it is being favorited. And when you press it again, it's like being toggled to unfavorite. So same thing, because we want to keep track of a state of a particular item, we have to use use state, right? Like its favorite set is favorite. So every single time the button is being pressed, we can toggle the favorite as the opposite of, so if it's initially not favorited, when you press it, it becomes favorited, so on and so forth. So likewise, we can wrap it around in a touchable facility on press. Okay. And then okay, and then console log. Yeah. So when you press COM3 favorite, and then it toggles on and off. So now we want the color to change when the thing is being pressed, whether or not it's true or false. So we can add like a conditional logic here, so that if you want to embed JavaScript into the thing. Okay, again, right, this is syntax. You don't have to worry about it. Um, you can learn it. Yeah. So something like this, right? So if it's being favorited, it will be blue. If its favorite is false, it is going to be gray. And yeah, of course, like if you want to implement it in real life, you can instead of like creating your own component from scratch, you can use an image and switch the image. If it's true, you use a specific image. If it's false, you use another image. That kind of stuff. And then if you go back to the drawing board, we realize that okay, there's also a gap between whatever is whatever component, the whatever parent component that is, and the items inside the parent component. So same thing, we can add a padding to the x-axis, and oops, not this, to the parent component, which is here. So now there's a gap between the border and whatever is within the parent component. And we also want to add a gap on top of the thing. So which is padding top or to the whole y-axis. Yeah. And then okay, so now we have this. Of course, like if you want to, you can go into more details for this. Like you can look at the bus stop name, and then you also notice that it is made out of smaller components. Like in this case, it is first, there is a first horizontal alignment, which is the com tree and the subheader and the distance. So this is a horizontal, this is a row organization, and within the com tree there is a column um organization. But it's the same concept. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So before we move on, I'm just going to make some refinement so that the bus stop, it takes up more space than the others, and then add a bit of margin to the left. Yeah, so now the name takes up as much space as it possibly can. Okay, so let me just remove the red background. Okay, okay, I noticed that there are borders on top and bottom. Okay, yeah, something like this. So now we are almost done with this. And one more thing that we notice is that in the actual NUS bus app, if you press on a particular bus stop, you there's going to be a pop-up, not a pop-up, but like a new component that's being rendered right below um the actual like name of the bus stop. So if you go back to the drawing board, right, we notice that um actually this is not fully accurate because there is a hidden component underneath the bus, like this whole component, right? And this hidden component is, you can think of it as like there's a box that is capturing this component, and these are being organized vertically, so it's a column. But the catch is that the details here, right, the bus timing underneath the main component is hidden until you press on it. So we want to be able to implement something like this, right? So first thing is that, okay, this whole thing is being um organized vertically under like an imaginary box. We can call this like a view or something. So within this imaginary box, we want to um sort of like conditionally render this timing component, which only appears when the the bus component is being pressed on. So let's go on to the first item, right, which is that we want to implement this like imaginary component that encapsulates this component and this hidden component. If you go back to what we have here, you can, yeah, here. So within this bus component, um, there is another view that is capturing this whole thing. And this hidden component. Okay, I'm going to use a placeholder and call it hidden component. Okay, so likewise, this thing is being rendered vertically, so it should be a column. So the main parent, instead of because now the main parent, this is the main parent, is now a column. So I'm going to copy this to this. And then this parent component is going to have a column, is going to organize the children in column, something like this, right? So now we have, for each bus stop, we have a hidden component. And now we want to make the hidden component hidden until it is being toggled. And we can do this using same thing, right? A state. We need to keep track of a state. So let's say is timing component open. Set is timing component. So if this thing is true, we want it to show the hidden component, or else we don't want it to show. Now we can do the same thing. We can add JavaScript into this, and so that if this evaluates to true, this thing will be rendered. But if this thing evaluates to false, this thing will not be rendered. And by default it's false. So we can have something like this. Oops, not this, sorry. It should be here. Yeah. So if I change like the value to true, it will be rendered. If I change the value to false, it won't be rendered. So now I need a way to make it such that when I click on it, this thing toggles to true or false. So I can create a function with JavaScript, toggle timing component, and do the same thing as what I did earlier and set the timing component to the opposite every time this function is being called. And same thing, right? Because now I want this whole component to be pressable. Instead of using a view, I can use a touchable opacity so that this thing is pressable. And I want it to be such that when I press onto the whole component, I can call this function. So now every time I press this button, right, the hidden component is shown, and I press it again, it is hidden. So on and so forth, right? So now we want to be able to implement like whatever is shown in the hidden component. So again, same thing, right? Now we have been treating it as a black box. So for the hidden component, we can think of it as a box also. And then within the box, it has sort of a list of timings for the different buses. And again, this thing is being organized in a column. So we want to use flex row for later on. And for now, we can, yeah, again, do the same thing and treat the individual bus timing as a black box. So we go back to the drawing board. We go back to the code, and then for each of the hidden component, okay, let's just do this, right? View, and then you have the text, and let's say for the first one, you have the, bus stop 1 and bus stop 2, so on and so forth. Okay, not bus stop, bus 1, so on and so forth. So, but remember that we already have the information of the bus stop here, right? Within the data that we pass into the child component. So now each bus stop component has a bus stop. So what we can do is that instead of doing this, we can just map the bus stops, the buses, into a name, and for now let's just put a name. Okay. So each of the bus stop will have their own view. Okay, so for now we just again treat this as a black box. And now we have done something, like this. And maybe I can add a bit of like border to it. Border. So that, and then make it take out the full width. Yeah. And make it lighter, maybe. Yeah. So now I want to go back to the drawing board. And then for each of the bus timing, again, I treat it as a box. And within the bus timing, I noticed that there are actually a few components that make up the timing. The name of the bus and the arriving time 1 and the arriving time 2, and a button. So again, we use the same concept as this. Everything is being arranged in rows instead of columns. So we want to arrange everything in row. And in this case, instead of, I don't know, like maybe we can observe that instead of pushing everything apart, everything takes up the central space of the component, the parent component. So unlike the rest, we want to, yeah, space them out evenly in the center instead of pushing them to take up the whole space. So same thing. With full, I want to organize everything in row. So I have, let's say um sorry, let's just map first. Okay, so at first it is being organized in column, right? Now we want to change it such that they are being organized in row. So we want to do this. Okay, now they are being organized in row. And like what we mentioned just now, right? Now instead of pushing everything to space out evenly and take up the whole space, you want to put everything into the center. So instead of between, you can use center. Okay, now something like that, right? And of course, like we can add a bit of margin, that kind of stuff. You know, let's just cover this in another component. And then take this. Sorry. So I can add like a margin to the thing. And then likewise, I can also add a margin here to the timing. Okay, but actually on hindsight, they do occupy the whole space. So and then we can add padding so that there's more gap between whatever. So padding X6. Yeah, of course, like you can do like minor touch up, like making it bold, so on and so forth. But those are details. Minutes. Yeah, and then you need a button for the arrow. Okay, so now we have something that looks a bit more similar, right? Um, of course, like the details you can also touch up, but the general idea is the same, right? Which is that we want to be able to go from very high levels to lower level, and we can just like treat smaller components as a black box. And until we need to code it out, we can just like use like a placeholder text or whatever. So now we have something like this. And then for the last thing, we have the navigation bar. So same thing, right? I can create my own navigation bar component. Um, and then I can replace this with my navigation bar. And this is, yeah, this is going to be my navigation bar. And like what I did just now, I'm going to hard code the margin because it is getting at the bottom of the screen, but do not do this in your actual code, I mean in your actual app, because it might work on iPhone 15, but when you have different screen sizes for Android and whatnot, if you just like hard code your margin, everything will be off. So do not hard code your margin and stuff. But for the purpose of this workshop, I'm going to just do this. Right. So same thing within the navigation bar. You can go back to here and just observe that everything is organized, you know, in rows. You have the home page, the bus stop, whatever. So this is in row, and everything is spaced out. Everything is occupying the whole space of what the parent can provide. And again, we treat whatever icon and whatever this as a black box, right? Because we don't really care about it now. So we do the same thing. Um, let's say we have, okay, um, we have pages, I don't know, um, oops, an array of items, and each item is an object with a name and let's say an icon, but we don't really have icons for now. Let's just, I mean, for now we just hard code everything to faith icon, I guess. Faith icon. Okay. Okay. Also, the name, I'm just going to use placeholder for now. Okay. So I want to map each of the names into its own component. Okay. For now, I don't really care about the details of the component. I can just use a placeholder and call it like the the name of the thing. All right. So this is like a black box. And then now I have everything that is mapped here, right? Right. I'm spacing them between. I'm using flex row because everything is organized horizontally, so on and so forth. And likewise, I can do some minor tweak. I can add padding to the X, add padding, more padding, so on and so forth. Right. And yeah, so and each of these, instead of a view, it can be a touchable opacity thing. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because like for the second session, we'll be revamping the whole thing and using some libraries for to handle the navigation. But for now we have, I'm hard coding this, but so that just so that you can see how we break down an interface into smaller components and create it from scratch. So I think one last thing before we end off is that we also notice that okay, like the thing is a bit screwed up because when I open multiple tabs, everything is now, taking up more space than what is available um to the bus stop list. So this is because like right now the bus stop list has a limited amount of space given by the parent, right? But when we open up more tabs, like this amount of space that is rendered exceeds the space that is available. So one obvious way we can fix this is that maybe instead of using a view, we can use something that's scrollable. So let's go back to the list of bus stops, right? So we can import a scrollable view and then come here and then where is it? Bus stop list, yeah, here. And change this into scroll view. I'm not sure whether the style will be screwed up. Oh shit. So you should. Hmm. Okay, let's keep that for now.
Bro, there's a typo.
Oh, there's a typo. Um, okay, I'm not sure. Okay, but I guess like you can debug this using AI or whatever. But the idea is that okay, the idea is the same, right? Whereas like if you have limited view, you want to be able to make it scrollable. Such that it can if there's like the space exists what's given, you can be able to scroll it. So of course, like right now, this whole thing is like very messy because everything is coded in one page, right? But you can imagine like various ways you can go about, like make it more modular. So one example is that, for example, all these like constants, right? I can just, instead of like defining the constants here, right? I can create, like um a folder called constants, and then bus ts. So ts is for TypeScript. Basically anything that has to do with TypeScript, you can put here. That's pure TypeScript. Whereas tsx is like for TypeScript, and like if you have JSX component. So if you have, like things that you want to render onto your page, you just define it as tsx. So what I can do here is that I can just take out the whole um bus stop timing, um Control X, paste it here, export it, um format, and then I'll go back here, and then I'm going to import the bus stop timings from the constants, right? And it's going to work the same way, right? Now this is a bit less messy. And likewise, for, let's say, for now, because we are hard coding the navigation bar, and you would imagine that the navigation bar would be repeated across different screens, right? Not just your current screen. It is in a sense reusable, right? So instead of like defining within your own page, you can, let's say, create like a folder for reusable components. Um, and then within your reusable components, you can add like a navigation bar.tsx, and then add this, and then export um default, and then import everything here. And then from here, likewise, you import your navigation bar. Reusable navigation bar. Oh, I mean, the path is, because I move it, it is affected, I guess. Yeah, but you can like organize your stuff better. And you can also imagine like having, like buttons that are reusable across your um the across your different, components, so that you don't have to recode the same button. For example, if your button has like nice button with cool um colors or whatever, right? You have a button that you want to reuse across like different components, right? Let's say it has, you know, um it can be a primary button, it can be a secondary button. Let's say you accept variant, which can be primary or secondary, and depending on whether or not it is um so depending on whether it's primary, yeah, um whether or not it's primary, it will have different styles, that kind of stuff, right? um let's just okay, something like this, right? So let's say you have a button, you can imagine like using the export. Oh, reusable nice button. Okay, whatever. So and then you have com3. Now you can add the different buttons, and now, yeah, yes. Okay, so now you have, like buttons where you can reuse across like multiple screens, but you can pass in like arguments that can change the style, or like if you um, let's say you can also pass in the title and then the title. And so if it's like a, like a delete account, um a button that is like dangerous, you can put it as red, and then like whatever sign up button can be blue. So that kind of stuff, right? You can define a component that can be reused across like multiple stuff, so that you don't cloud up your own. You don't have to repeat the same code everywhere. So that's like basically the gist of the first part of React Native. So right now, what we did is that basically we go through the basic concepts of how to use JSX, JavaScript, and a bit of CSS to design like a very basic interface. Again, right, this a lot of the data and logic are hard coded, but you would imagine that in an actual app you would be able to get this data. So the intuition is that, okay, if you look at a specific interface, you want to be able to break it down into smaller components, right? By just like look at this and say, okay, what are the children components that is contained within this parent component. And then from there on, you just like treat it as a black box, and then you just code out the components. And then once you're done with it, you can zoom in one level deeper, and then do the same thing again and like recursively. So yeah. And before we end off, I just want to say that like even though I'm using AI right now, for your Orbiter, don't use AI, because like the point of Orbiter is so that you can, I mean, you can use AI to debug and whatnot, but don't use AI to code out your app. So you still want to be able to understand what is going through your app. And even if you do decide to use AI for some reasons, um just like remember to still sort of like, be able to architect the whole thing at a very high level before you outsource to AI. So like what I did just now is like I break it down into smaller components before I let AI do the nitty-gritty details of filling up the small work. But in an ideal scenario, you wouldn't even have to use AI. So yeah, so the high level side of like making the decisions as to where to, how to organize stuff, that kind of stuff, right? Like in this case, like the AI wouldn't tell you that, okay, you should, like refactor this thing into its own mini components. But you know that if you do it on your own, it's going to be more modular and easy, more scalable. So don't rely too much on AI. Still have a high level of understanding of what is going through your code base. And so for the next lesson, we are going to try to deal a bit with like APIs. So we are going to fetch some data from some external sources, and then we'll try to do some data manipulation, that kind of stuff. And we try to use some um, libraries, because I will assume that for your Orbital project, most of you won't be creating like coding everything from scratch. So you will have to make use of different libraries that have been created by other people. So how do you integrate like libraries? How do you make use of libraries? How do you make use of external APIs? That kind of stuff. Um, and before um I end off, like I hope that you all have a good understanding of at least like the intuition that goes into how to design and organize code within React Native. Um, and hopefully, I mean, if you want, like you can do a bit more readings as to like the details on like how to style everything, that kind of stuff, because it takes a while to learn. It's not easily covered within the 2 hours that we have. So I did rush through a lot of the fundamental like um concepts that has to do with like styling and that kind of stuff. But the main takeaway should still be this: like how do you break down components into smaller components and code it from scratch. So if you have any questions, you can ask now, or else we can end it. Yeah, I guess that's it for today. Wait, sorry. Where do we get? Oh, maybe that's a typo. Yeah. The project, I think I can send it over to the GitHub link. I'll share it over either through email or like through the Canvas link, the Canvas like page. I'll update the Canvas page, I think. Yeah. Mm, yeah, you can. So right, as I say, right, like right now I've been hard coding a lot of stuff, but a lot of this can be solved easily with like what he said, safe area view or other measures. So don't hard code because you would have to be able to account for different screen sizes. Um yeah. If not, I'll see you all next week. Thanks for coming.